Ingrid, welcome to the show. Gosh, it's been a bit of a grim week, hasn't it, really?
Oh, not really. I think there's always politics and talking things down when you're in the opposition.
Oh, no, I was just thinking about it's winter. It's sort of, everything's not going so well in terms of the economy. Mortgage rates going up, cost of living going up, price of food's going up. Still got that 25 cents a litre petrol diesel tax to go on. Technically in recession. You're still optimistic about getting to the election with the government in good economic shape, you reckon?
Look, first of all, absolutely agree that the cost of living is biting, and I know we all feel it every time we go to the supermarket. Sometimes I've had to have a look through my chit at the end and think, was I overcharged or something? No, it's the cost of groceries. It really is hurting. We are in a technical recession. However, that was anticipated. You'll remember the Reserve Bank saying that last year. And we're still in line to get back to the 2 to 3% inflation by the end of next year. It's a technical recession. I think we're well placed to get out of it. So it's not a true recession in terms of the impact that it's likely to have on employment and so on. So I think we will be in good shape. We do need to work hard, but all of this was predictable, and especially after the Cyclone Gabriel. We wouldn't be in recession if it wasn't for that. That costs our economy between $10 and $14 billion, second biggest natural disaster in a century in New Zealand, ever, I think, recorded. So none of this was unpredictable. I do worry that the opposition are really talking this up to politicise it, and I guess that's what you do in politics, but we know that consumer confidence and business confidence do have a part to play in economic growth, and if we talk up this technical recession too much, we are actually in danger of making things worse.
And of course, you never would have done that, Ingrid, if you'd been in opposition with the roles reversed.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's what politicians do, isn't it?
I know. I mean, it's the job of the opposition to do that, and it's the job of the government to say it's not really as bad as it is. I think we've all got the game. Nevertheless, the interesting thing, I guess, from that is what does the future look like? I mean, I know it's 4 months to the election, and I guess it's inevitable that politicians won't see much beyond the 14th of October at the moment. But I'm just thinking through the next 6 months for New Zealand. Do you anticipate an improvement in economic conditions, or do you think that this recession will go through to December and the same sort of economic settings we're seeing at the moment will pretty much continue until then?
Well, it's a bit of crystal ball gazing, isn't it? All I know is that we do have forecasting that shows inflation will come down to 2 to 3% by the end of next year. A lot of this has been created through global factors. You mentioned the petrol rebate. That has been factored into inflation. It does have an inflationary impact of about 0.4%. So that's already been taken into account in terms of what will happen when that comes off. And I'm heartened to see that there hasn't been greedflation in the latest headlines, because my worry was that people would use the petrol rebate coming off to sort of increase prices anyway. It looks like business in New Zealand isn't doing that, which is really good. So the inflationary impact that should be nominal at 0.4%. It still bites, but everything that this government is doing at the moment is trying to bring down that inflation level, which is why you're seeing constrained spending. And it is going to hurt for a while. But I think towards the end of the year, we will see the pressure ease, and going into next year, then we'll definitely see that inflation coming down.
That's not until the end of next year, so that's still a lot of hardship to go before then. I'm just interested, though, in the fact that we're in recession. Now, if the Reserve Bank was doing its job properly, Ingrid, and tackling inflation, we wouldn't be in recession. The aim isn't to crash the economy, is it?
Well, I can only repeat what I heard from the Reserve Bank Governor in our Select Committee last year in Finance and Expenditure, where he said that he was deliberately wanting to contract the economy to take the heat out of it, and he used the word recession. I think he was probably talking about this technical recession. Remember, we were not forecast actually to go into it, and then Cyclone Gabriel hit. But that was the language of the Reserve Bank Governor. So I think they have been using their monetary policy quite significantly, which is why the mortgage, interest rates are hurting people a bit at the moment. It is all to take the heat out of the economy, to bring that demand side down so that we can get inflation back into line.
Your constituency is, I won't say it's one of the poorer, but it's not at the top end of the socio-economic scale in New Zealand. South Dunedin, for example, is an area, Belclutha, Milton, that have significant numbers of poor, sick, elderly, who are reliant solely on national superannuation. How are they going to be compensated for dealing with the cost of living that they are confronting at the moment?
Well, you've seen the targeted support that the government has initiated through several budgets, and all of that is aimed at those at the lower end. So we're not talking about the squeezed middle, and you and I have had conversations about that, but very much at the lower end, and you're quite right. The tidy electorate is characterised by having a significant number of people in that cohort. So they are receiving things like the winter energy payment. They have seen superannuation rates go up quite significantly, more than $100 a week, a fortnight for couples, and so on. So many of my constituents are receiving the targeted support. It's still very challenging for them. Having said that, because these are people who are used to living with very tight budgets, they are pretty stoic about being able to cope with difficult conditions. They know how to budget, they know how to get through. So actually morale in Tidy has been really good when I've been out and about, and I've been out and about a lot lately.
Actually, it's interesting though that it is such a negative environment at the moment. Yeah, I think you're right. I think internationally it's not. These are not conducive to trading platform ideas. But I am interested in how the government is dealing particularly with some of the things. Like, for example, there's criticism coming back the other way at the moment from the Climate Change Commission, others, after the second failure of the emissions trading scheme auction earlier this week, that the government is starting to backpedal because of cost of living pressures on the commitments it's made to carbon neutrality and to emissions trading scheme in toto. What's your response to that? Do you think, well, that's fair enough because you've got to put one thing before the other?
We have seen that we have a Prime Minister who is keen to get back to basics, and the cyclone and weather events were not predicted. We've seen from the Prime Minister this week that that the commitments remain, and so I think it is a bit of a balancing act, and it's a different leadership style. But the Prime Minister said fairly and squarely that we will carry on with the emissions trading scheme, and we've heard James Shaw say similar this week. So I don't think it's as grim as people think. And if we're getting attention from both the left and the right, then we're probably in about the right space. I would note too, it's not all gloom and doom. We've had a report saying our primary industry exports are going to reach a record high of $56 billion this year. So despite the rhetoric, there are good indicators out there.
Oh yes, I know. I mean, and that's the irony, isn't it? It's the farming sector or the agricultural and horticultural sector that's saving the economy. And I guess that's a reason why the Prime Minister headed off to field days this week. The new announcement to do, were you part of that? The new announcement that he was making around emissions and working with farmers to come to something that might be a little bit more realistic?
No, it wasn't. I've seen the coverage. I'm actually parked up outside field days at the moment, about to go in for my shift. Very much looking forward to it. But I certainly saw the commentary that he wants to ensure that He Waka Ikanoa is empowered to be able to work with the government to come up with solutions that work for everybody. This is not around imposing things. He's obviously very optimistic that consensus can be reached. And I think for these very wicked problems, climate change and so on, a consensus basis is required, really, because they've got to be able to last beyond parliamentary terms.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. Best of luck on that, though, I think would be in the moment in the current heated environment. And talking about current heated environments, the teacher strikes continue, Ingrid. I'm getting a lot of feedback from people who are on the centre-left of and are even sympathetic to the teachers' cause, that they've had enough and that they are now dramatically concerned for their children's learning. We don't seem to be any closer to a resolution.
Yeah, and I'm not going to comment while that's being negotiated, but I did have a very interesting visit to Tainui School in my electorate the other day to talk to teachers about their frustrations. And one of the most salient things that came out of that for me was the fact that a view that the funding models don't necessarily suit the new way of learning. And one of the more senior teachers there described how in the old days there'd be a classroom of 30, there'd be a sort of authoritarian figure at the front, keeping people in line. It wasn't the best way to learn. Now it looks more like cafe styles, but it takes a much higher volume of teachers, much more one-on-one learning, and the funding models don't seem to reflect that. There was a view that they wanted to go right back to building blocks and relook at the whole structure and system to say how can the business model suit the new learning models. And I think that's got some merit to it. That again is a long-term proposition, something that would take cross-party working through. But I think that when people make comments like that who've been in the sector for 30, 40 years, we should take them quite seriously. The other thing I've always said is that, teaching's a feminised sector. This has been decades of underinvestment and under-recognition of what was seen as women's work, and so there's a lot of catching up to do, and catching up tends to happen under Labour governments.
I'm not so sure I agree with you there. My father's a school teacher. When I was at school, Ingrid, over half of the teaching staff were for male. It's changed because I think males have been hounded out of the teaching sector, don't you think?
Oh, I think it'd be really interesting to see some research on why we don't have many men in the system, and I think having some evidence on that would be very enlightening, because there could be all sorts of reasons. I think you've named one of them, that it can be seen as quite a dangerous vocation for some men, but I'm sure there are lots of reasons why, and paying conditions will be one of them.
Which leads me to the next issue, I guess, and that is to do with, it was something that came up in the Environment Select Committee. Now, you might be aware of it. Do you sit on that Select Committee at all?
No, I've subbed in a couple of times.
Okay, well, this was to do with Three Waters, ironically. This week, I think Newsroom highlighted it, one of the non-traditional mainstream media, that the Environment Committee that was discovered doing changes to the Three Waters legislation, the second part of that Three Waters legislation, had uniformly agreed, National Labour, whoever else is sitting on there, what those changes should be. And when they saw the bill reported back to Parliament, it had none of those changes, and that they had been overruled by officials, and that those changes had not occurred. Were you aware of that?
I think you may be referring to the water legislation bill that went to our Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, which I chair, and it wasn't the way the bill was reported back. There was some coverage around commentary made by the committee regarding process and an observation that there needed to be really rigorous oversight by the MPs to ensure that drafting instructions were followed. I don't really want to make any comment on that. Everything that the Select Committee had to say is in the report.
Well, you weren't happy. I mean, at the end of the day, were you? That what you'd wanted to happen had been undermined by staff in various departments. and particularly, as I understand,
Well,
the Ministry for the Environment.
No, it was Department of Internal Affairs.
Oh, Department of Internal Affairs.
What I will say, the Select Committee did its job, and I think New Zealanders can be reassured by this that the Select Committee process works and that we have a robust democracy.
But do you have a robust civil bureaucracy? That's the issue. All right, and finally, I'll tell you something that's got people going, and it probably has you've probably been deluged by it, is this new Therapeutic Products Bill, which has now also been reported back, as I understand, as a result of thousands of submissions. And the government have indicated changes on that. Are you across that one?
I'm not across the detail. I do know that it's an old bill, and there needed to be regulation in that area to ensure that people were not sort of victims of, kind of, I would not call it puppetry, but, fake medicines with spurious claims that were unregulated. But there was a lot of pushback around saying, we don't want vitamin C to have to be prescribed and so on. A lot of the submissions and the emails that came to me seemed to be based on misinformation about what the bill actually did. I know that changes that have been made include ensuring that Maori traditional medicines are not included in the bill. But given, there was a petition actually presented to Parliament about it that came from a group that was headed by somebody in my electorate, and I just didn't feel confident that people who signed that petition were actually basing their opposition to the bill on true information. I was so concerned about some of the graphics I saw in some of the social media coverage, and so I actually declined to accept that, which is quite unusual, but I just didn't feel that people were fully informed. So I know there have been changes made by the Select Committee. Again, that's a good thing that shows the process is working, but the bill is really a tidy up and bringing these non-medicines that are therapeutic products, bringing the regulations up to date, because it was very out of date and needed updating. And so it's quite a storm in a teacup in my view.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I think even the ministers yesterday, it was Aisha Verrall and the Associate Minister of Health, that's Pine Hanari, isn't it? They actually say, quote unquote, that the bill as originally drafted went too far. Well, when you do go too far, you do tend to get that sort of pushback, yeah?
Yeah, and they were tweaks though, and that's what select committees do, as you know. They either tweak or panel beat bills depending on the state that they arrive at the select committee, and New Zealanders can feel reassured that the select committee process in New Zealand, in my view, works really well. We do see these changes, and that's what the committees are there for.
But the whole idea of the Natural Health Products Bill, as I understand it, was laudatory in one way, and that was to make sure that anything that is sold that pretends to be a medicine or is a medicine, so it has some sort of therapeutic chemical effect upon the human body or brain, should be safe. I mean, that was the primary driver of it, was it not?
That's right.
So if that's the case, why would you exempt Renoa Maori from it, which is Maori traditional herbal remedies, for example, when there isn't necessarily the scientific or medical efficacy to declare that those things are necessarily safe?
Yeah, I'm not across that, Michael, so it would be remiss of me to offer a comment. I imagine that there will be another governance element to that sits outside of that bill to ensure safety and so on. And if we look at Māori traditional medical practices, there's a very, very broad range of both substances but also actions that are included in that. I don't know enough about it to comment more than that, but there will be a governance to it, and it probably is not, it's not within this bill, but it will be governed in some way. And so I'm going to go off and do my homework on this one. Okay,
good on you, because we might talk about it before, because Pine Hanari said, no, we're not going to have any governance at all. It is going to, we've listened to, he said, this is what he said yesterday, we've listened to what Maori have told us, it is now such that the government will not regulate Ranoa and the new regulations, and that means whānau will continue to use and manage Ranoa just as they have for generations. So there is no suggestion. It's just I think the general concept is good. Don't get me wrong. And you're absolutely right. Natural health quacks that come up and say, well, this will cure cancer. You do not want to make sure that they're around. But on the other hand, if you're going to go down the path of making sure that everything that you sell, which has a supposedly medical therapeutic benefit, is safe, I wouldn't have exempted anything, would you?
Well, tikanga is acknowledged as a form of governance, and I know that is very difficult for many of your listeners to accept.
Well, I think for most New Zealand.
There is. Well, no, that's an assumption, but there is governance within tikanga, and also you've assumed that this applies to selling products, and I agree there should potentially be a line between which products are used within whānau, which ones are sold, and when I say whānau, I mean for all therapeutic products. So there's a lot of assumptions in what we're saying, but you've said what the Minister said, that's what I've seen reported, and that's my understanding, that it's not captured by this bill. And tikanga is one area of governance. I don't know if there are other areas or not, but as I say, I'll go and do my homework on it.
Good on you. Okay, we'll go and enjoy Field Day. Are you going to be doing anything exotic today, like tasting wild foods or something like that?
I'm going to be doing a lot of listening. Last Field Day, my mission was to make sure that every single person that I had a conversation with felt like they'd been heard. That's what I'm intending to do today. So
I'll tell you what, I don't think you'll have an option, Ingrid.
I really enjoyed it. Last time I did 3 days. I'm only here for a day, so keen to get into it.
All right, good on you. Have a good weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Ingrid Leary, the National, as a Freudian, Labour Party MP for Tairi. You will have some views on that. The reason I raised, the teacher strikes and Ranoa Maori are two issues. You would have heard my views on Ranoa Maori, but there's tikanga, and it was interesting. And listen, Ingrid's straight up about it. If it's tikanga Maori, essentially it's its own governance structure, and it cannot be questioned. And I'm going, yeah. You go for your life on that. But I think that if we are going to have a country that tries to make everybody safe, we'll talk more with Ingrid on that next week.